Hello, everyone. It's Mr. Kissinger at the Citizenship Academy in Syracuse, New York. This is 5th grade math, module 4, lesson 21. We're going to explain the size of the product and relate fraction and decimal equivalents by multiplying a fraction by 1. So we're going to turn fractions into decimal numbers here. So first we're going to practice multiplying fractions by 1. We're going to multiply by fractions that are equivalent to 1. So letter A here has been done for us. It says 1/4 times 1 equals 1/4 times 3/3 because 1 and 3/3 are the same number. 1/4 times 3/3 is 3/12. So it'll give us an equivalent fraction to 1/4. Letter B says 3/4 times 1 equals 3/4 times blank equals 21/28. So we have to make 3/4 into 21/28. Well, 3 times 7 is 21. 4 times 7 is 28. So that 1, in this case, will be 7/7. Letter C says 7/4 times 1 equals 7/4 times blank equals 35/20, 35/20. Well, 7 times 5 will give us 35, and 4 times 5 will give us 20, so we'll multiply by 5/5. Letter D says use words to compare the size of the product to the size of the first factor. So the product here is going to be equivalent to our first factor because we are multiplying by 1. Now, when we want to turn our fractions into decimal equivalents, just like we did here, we're going to multiply by a fraction equivalent to 1, but we're going to want to make our product a fraction with a denominator that is a multiple of 10, so either 10, 100, 1,000. So that way we'll end up with tenths, hundredths, thousandths. Those are easy to write in decimal notation. So this one has kind of been started for us here. We have 1/4 times 25/25. Well, we know that's going to give us a denominator of 100. 4 times 25 is 100. Our numerator is going to be 1 times 25, which will give us 25. So we have 25 hundredths. In decimal form, that will look like this. 0.25. 25 hundredths. 2 tenths and 5 hundredths. Letter B says 3/4 equals, or 3/4 times 25/25 equals, well, our denominator will still be 100. Our numerator is going to be 3 times 25, which is 75. We'll end up with 75 hundredths, which looks like this, 0.75. 75 hundredths. Our 5 is in the hundredths place. Our 7 is in the tenths place. Now, it wants us to come up with a fraction to multiply by 1/5 that will get us a multiple of 10. Well, I don't need to go all the way to 100. I can just multiply by something to turn my fifths into tenths. And in this case, I'm going to multiply by 2. So I'll have to multiply by 2 halves. 2 times 5 is 10. That'll give us our denominator of tenths. And then 1 times 2 is 2. 1/5 is equivalent to 2 tenths. And 2 tenths looks like this, just a 2 in the tenths place value. Letter D, we have 4/5. Well, again, I want to turn this into tenths, so I can do 2 halves, which will make my denominator tenths. 5 times 2 is 10. And this time my numerator is going to be 4 times 2, which will give me 8. And that will give me 8 tenths. If I want to see what 1/20th is in decimal form, I'll need to multiply something by 20 to get me either 10, 100, 1,000. Well, I can multiply 20 times 5, and that will give me 100. So I'll multiply my numerator times 5. So I'm going to multiply by 5/5. And I'll end up with 5/100ths, which looks like this. Just a 5 in the hundredths place. Letter F is 27/20ths. 27/20ths times 5/5. Again, since our denominator is 20, I want to multiply by 5 to get to 100. I have to multiply my numerator by 5 as well. If I want to do 27/5, 27 times 5, I'm going to get 35. 3 times 5 is 10, plus 3, 135. And I could have done 25 times 5, I know it would be 125, plus 2 more 5s would give me 135. But we can always check it with vertical multiplication as well if we're unsure. But it's going to give me 135 hundredths, which will give me 1 35 hundredths, which is 1 35 hundredths, just like that. Letter G, we have 7/4. I need to make my fourths into either tenths or hundredths. I can't multiply 4 by anything, any whole number to get me to 10. So I'll need to multiply by a number to get me to 100. Well, 4 times 25 will give me 100. So I need to multiply my numerator by 25 as well. Multiply by 25 25ths. My denominator is going to be 100. And I need 25 times 7. Well, 25 times 4 is 100, plus 25 times 3, which is 75, will give me 175 altogether. So I have 175 100ths, which is really 1 75 hundredths, or 1.75. If I need to do 8/5, well, I can just multiply by 2 on my denominator, multiply by 2 on my numerator. So I'm really multiplying by 2 halves, or 1. That's going to give me 16/10, which is 10/10 plus 6/10. 10/10 is 1, and 6/10 looks just like that. So 1 6/10, 16/10. 24 25ths, I'm going to multiply by 4/4. My denominator will be 100, and my numerator will be 24 times 4, which will be 96. 96 hundredths will look like this. All right, let's try a word problem. All right, so let's try number 3. Jack said that if you take a number and multiply it by a fraction, the product will always be smaller than what you started with. Is he correct? Why or why not? Explain your answer and give at least 2 examples to support your thinking. So Jack is saying if you take a number and you multiply it by a fraction, the product's going to always be smaller. Well, we've been doing examples of multiplying by fractions where we're not ending up with a smaller number. In fact, we end up with the same number in a different form. So I'm going to start by saying that Jack is not correct. Because if you multiply by a number smaller than 1, or less than 1, then you'll end up with a number smaller than what you started with. But if you multiply by a fraction that's 1 or greater, then you'll end up with a number greater than you started with. So some fractions are greater than or equal to one whole. If they're greater than one whole, if they're equal to greater than one whole, then that would be an improper fraction, but that would still be a fraction. So some fractions are greater than or equal to one whole. Multiplying by these fractions will result in a equal or greater product. And we need a few examples here. So I could do if I do 2 times 2 halves, but multiply 2 times 2, and I would get 4 fourths or 4 eighths. What do I have here? 2 times, because I'm going to multiply by my numerator here, excuse me, 4 halves, because I'd have a 1 in my denominator, it'd be 2 over 1, and 4 halves really still equals 2. So that would result in the same number. Let's say we multiplied by, let's say we had 3, and we multiplied by 4 thirds. Well, I have 3 times 4 would give me 12. And my denominator would still be 3. So I have 12 thirds, which will give me 4. So I give 2 examples of numbers that will be greater than or equal to, their products will be greater than or equal to the number that we started with when we multiply by a fraction. All right, so we're going to stop right there for today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and look forward to seeing everybody next time.